You're about to hear a story that will remind you how one small act of kindness can ripple through lives in ways you'd never expect. This is the tale of Jake Malone, a truck driver with calloused hands and a weary soul, who pulled over in a storm for a stranger, only to find his entire life turned upside down the very next day. But this isn't just a story about luck. It's about secrets buried in the past, a mysterious woman in the rain, and a helicopter landing beside a highway that would leave Jake and you breathless. Welcome back to Comeback Tales. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windshield of Jake Malone's 18-wheeler like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop a reminder of how much he hated driving in storms. The road ahead was a blur of red taillights and slick asphalt, the kind of night where every mile felt like a gamble. Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing the exhaustion from his eyes. He'd been on the road for 12 hours straight, his back aching from the worn-out seat of his rig. The delivery deadline looming over him was already a lost cause, thanks to a blown tire outside Knoxville, and his dispatcher's last message had been brutal. "You missed this delivery, don't bother coming back." He tightened his grip on the wheel. This job was all he had left. After his mom passed, after the bills piled up, trucking was the only thing keeping him afloat. One missed delivery, and he'd be back to square one. And then he saw her, a slight figure, barely visible through the downpour, standing beside a stalled sedan on the shoulder of the highway. No Hasselflashing, no help coming. Just an elderly woman, her thin coat soaked through, her silver hair plastered to her face as she waved weakly at passing cars. Jake's foot hovered over the brake. "Keep driving," a voice in his head warned. "You're already late." But then the woman turned, and for a split second, he saw his mother's face. The way she'd looked the winter she got sick, frail, and shivering. Before he could second-guess himself, Jake hit the brakes and pulled over. The rain stung his skin as he jogged toward her. "Ma'am," he called over the storm. "You okay?" The woman startled, her eyes widening as she took him in, a burly trucker in a soaked flannel, his beard dripping. For a second, she looked almost relieved. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed. "My car it won't start. I've been out here nearly an hour." Jake didn't hesitate. He helped her into the passenger seat of his rig, cranked the heat, and handed her his spare jacket, the thick one his mom had given him years ago. "Let's get you somewhere dry," he said. Over the next 2 hours, Jake learned 3 things about the woman. Her name was Margaret. She had no family nearby. She carried a faded photograph in her purse, but wouldn't say why. He also lost his job. By the time he'd arranged a tow truck, driven Margaret to a diner, and made sure she had a ride home, his delivery window had slammed shut. His phone buzzed with a final text from dispatch. "Consider this your last run." Jake stared at the message, his stomach sinking. He'd known the risk. But as he turned to leave the diner, Margaret caught his wrist. "You're a good man, Jake," she said softly. "The world notices kindness like yours." Something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't just gratitude. It was almost like she knew something. Before he could ask, she pressed a folded napkin into his palm. When he opened it later, alone in his truck, all it said was, "Tomorrow, be where you need to be." Jake stared at the napkin until the ink smudged under his calloused fingers. "Tomorrow, be where you need to be." The words gnawed at him like a bad riddle. He'd just lost his job, his rig was due back at the depot by noon, and now some old woman had left him a fortune cookie message. He crumpled the napkin and tossed it onto the passenger seat just as his phone buzzed. The screen flashed with a number he knew too well, Midwest Freight Dispatch. His throat tightened as he answered. "Malone." "Jake." It was Carl, the operations manager. The pause that followed was long enough to make Jake's knuckles whiten around the steering wheel. "Look, we've worked together a long time, but corporate says the contract's void if the delivery's late. You know how it is." A cold weight settled in Jake's gut. "I was helping someone. An old lady stranded in the yeah. HR said you can collect your last check Friday. The line went dead. Jake exhaled sharply, thumping his head against the seat. 10 years. 10 damn years with the company. Gone because he'd done the decent thing. He glanced at the crumpled napkin. Maybe Margaret was just some lonely kook after all. The next morning, Jake woke before dawn in the rig's cramped sleeper berth, his back stiff from the thin mattress. He'd parked at a truck stop outside Harrisburg, too drained to face the long drive home to an empty apartment. The kind of apartment his mom would have filled with humming and the smell of cinnamon rolls. The kind that felt like a tomb now. He rubbed his face and reached for the coffee thermos, then froze. A sound cut through the morning fog, growing louder by the second. Not the growl of diesel engines, not the rumble of tires on asphalt. This was sharper, closer. Womp womp womp. Jake shoved open the cab door just as the wind hit him. A gale-force blast that sent trash skittering across the parking lot. Above him, a black helicopter descended like something out of a war movie, its skids barely clearing the roof of the truck stop diner. What the hell? People stumbled out of the building, phones raised. The chopper touched down in an empty lot beside Jake's rig, its rotors slowing to a menacing idle. A door slid open, and a man in a dark suit jumped out, scanning the crowd. Then his eyes locked onto Jake. The stranger marched forward, crisp as a soldier. Jacob Malone? Jake's pulse spiked. Had he accidentally hauled contraband? Was this about Margaret? Who's asking? The man didn't blink. He extended a cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax stamp. You're expected at this address by 7 p.m. tonight. Jake tore it open. The card inside was thick as a wedding invitation, embossed with gold foil. The Whitmore Foundation requests the honor of your presence at the annual Legacy Gala, the Pierre Hotel, New York City black tie, required beneath the formal text. A handwritten note. You kept your promise. Now keep mine. Jake's head snapped up. What is this? The man gestured to the helicopter. Your ride, sir. The flight to Chopper's interior was all leather and polished steel. Jake gripped the armrests as the ground fell away, his stomach lurching. Through the window, highways shrank into ribbons, then vanished in the clouds. Start talking, Jake demanded over the rotor noise. Who's Eleanor Whitmore? The suit didn't look up from his tablet. Philanthropist, widow of Charles Whitmore, founder of Nexitech. Jake's breath caught. Nexitech, the trillion-dollar tech giant. And Margaret, a smirk. Mrs. Whitmore enjoys hands-on charity work. The pieces clicked together with terrifying speed. The broken-down car, the odd gratitude, the test. Jake's hands curled into fists. So, that was all some rich lady's game? I lost my job for that. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. I assure you, Mr. Malone, Mrs. Whitmore compensates those who prove worthy. The gala night had fallen by the time they landed on a Manhattan skyscraper. A valet whisked Jake into an elevator, then produced a tailored tuxedo in Jake's exact size. How the hell? Measurements from her DMV photo, the valet said smoothly. The elevator doors opened onto a ballroom straight out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers, women in gowns that cost more than Jake's rig, the murmur of 100 conversations drowning in string quartet music. Then silence. Every head turned as Jake stepped forward. Whispers slithered through the crowd. That's him? The truck driver? Eleanor's pet project. At the far end of the room, a spotlight hit the stage. And there she was, Margaret. Except now her silver hair was swept into an elegant twist, her frame draped in a navy gown that shimmered under the lights. A portrait of a stern-faced man loomed behind her, Charles Whitmore. A voice boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. The crowd erupted in applause. Eleanor extended a hand toward Jake, her eyes glistening. Come here, Jacob. Microphones picked up her next words, broadcasting them to the room. 6 months ago, I began an experiment. I posed as a stranded senior on highways across 7 states. 92 drivers passed me by. 92. Her voice broke. Then came Jacob Malone, a man who risked his livelihood to help a stranger. She stepped closer, gripping Jake's hands. Tonight, the Whitmore Foundation grants him our highest honor, the Legacy Initiative. A screen lit up behind them, displaying a sleek building with a sign. Malone Transport Solutions founder. Jacob Malone. Jake's knees nearly gave out. This is too much. Eleanor shook her head. It's just the beginning. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a faded photograph, the same one Jake had glimpsed in her purse during the storm. Do you recognize her? Jake's breath left his body. The woman in the photo was his mother. The moment Jake saw his mother's face in that photograph, the world tilted sideways. The champagne flutes, the chandeliers, the murmurs of the wealthy crowd, all of it blurred into static as his calloused thumb traced the edges of the worn picture. His mother's sunflower dress, her crooked smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, just like his. Eleanor's grip on his arm tightened. Not here, she whispered, steering him away from the gawking guests. The heels of her designer shoes clicked against marble as they slipped into a private lounge, where the only sound was the hum of the city 30 stories below. Jake couldn't tear his eyes from the photo. Where did you get this? Eleanor's breath hitched. 30 years ago, I was pregnant with my son, Daniel. My husband and I were broke, living above a Pittsburgh laundromat while he built Nexitec from scratch. A muscle in Jake's jaw twitched. His mother had worked nights at a Pittsburgh laundromat. It was December, Eleanor continued. A blizzard hit. I went into labor early. No money for a cab, no cell phones back then. I stumbled into that laundromat, bleeding and terrified. Her voice cracked. Your mother dropped her mop, wrapped me in her own coat, and carried me 6 blocks through the snow to the hospital. Jake remembered his mother's rasping cough that Christmas, how she'd waved off his concern. Just a chill from helping some pregnant lady. Worth it. Eleanor's tears fell freely now. Daniel was born healthy. But your mother got pneumonia. Jake finished hollowly. He saw it all now. The medical bills hidden under the mattress, the way she'd insisted her factory job covered the cough medicine. Eleanor reached for him. We searched for years. When Charles died last winter, I swore I'd find Rose's family. She pressed the photo into his palm. Then my investigators found you. The helicopter, the gala, the goddamn test. Jake's hand shook. So this, the car, the rain, that was just your guilt trip? No. Eleanor's voice turned fierce. I needed to know if her son had her heart. And Jacob, her manicured fingers brushed the grease stains on his sleeve. You stopped, just like she did. Back in the ballroom, Eleanor took the microphone. Tonight, she announced, the Whitmore Foundation launches the Rose Malone Initiative, mobile medical clinics for truckers and forgotten towns. The screen behind her lit up with blueprints for 18-wheelers transformed into traveling hospitals. Then she turned to Jake, and to Jacob Malone, who carries his mother's kindness in his bones. We gift the seed capital to build Malone Transport Solutions. She placed a brass key in his hand. $50 million for your company and your mother's legacy. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. But Jake barely heard them over the roaring in his ears. Eleanor leaned close. One more thing, she whispered. Come home. 1 week later, Jake stood in the overgrown cemetery where his mother was buried. The headstone read, Rose Malone, 1965. 2018, she gave warm coats and cold sandwiches. Kneeling, he pressed his forehead to the cold granite. Met someone who knew you, Ma, he murmured. The wind carried his words away as he hung Eleanor's wreath of winter roses beside the stone. Turns out you were a hero long before you were mine. A hand settled on his shoulder. Eleanor stood beside him, silent. Behind them, idling at the cemetery gates, was a gleaming white semi with fresh lettering. Malone transport in memory of Rose Jake exhaled. Somewhere beyond the trees, a highway stretched into the dawn. And for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't look so lonely. And that, dear listeners, is the story of how one act of kindness on a stormy highway in a snow-covered street 30 years before changed countless lives forever. Jake Malone's journey reminds us that the echoes of our choices ripple farther than we'll ever know, and that love, once given, never truly disappears. If this story moved you, do us a favor. Hit subscribe to Comeback Tales for more real-life miracles that'll make you believe in second chances. Drop a like if you cried. We won't judge. And ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that could mend, or maybe even remake, your heart. Until next time, keep looking for the good in the road ahead. This is Comeback Tales, signing off, but the stories? They're just getting started.